The phone rang at 11:47 p.m. Daniel Cole almost didn't answer it. He was sitting on the edge of his bed in a dim apartment in a small lakeside town called Millbrook, the kind of place where the streets went quiet by 9 and the rain on the window was the only sound that mattered. The lamp on his nightstand flickered slightly, the way old bulbs do when they're tired of being useful. He stared at the screen. Unknown number. He almost let it go to voicemail. He always did. Nobody called him this late anymore. Not since Sarah left. Not since the divorce papers had been signed 2 years ago and the silence had moved in like a roommate he never asked for. But something made him pick it up. Hello? There was a pause. A breath. Then a woman's voice, soft, a little shaky, like she'd been crying or trying not to. Mom, is that you? Daniel blinked. I think you have the wrong number. Another pause, longer this time. He could hear rain on her end too, like maybe it was raining all over the state that night. Oh, she said. I'm sorry. I really thought. Her voice cracked in the middle of the sentence, and that was the part that stayed with him. Not the wrong number. Not the apology. Just the sound of someone trying to hold themselves together over the phone with a total stranger. It's okay, Daniel said, surprising himself. Are you all right? There was a long silence. He almost thought she'd hung up. No, she finally said. Not really. He didn't know why he didn't end the call. Maybe because his apartment had felt too quiet for too long. Maybe because something in her voice sounded like a person standing at the edge of something, and some old instinct in him didn't want to let her stand there alone. Do you want to talk about it? He asked. Or I can just stay on the line. Doesn't have to be anything. She laughed, but it wasn't really a laugh. More like air escaping something tight. You're a stranger, she said. I am, he agreed. That's probably why I'm still talking to you. Daniel hadn't always been this quiet. There was a version of him, years ago, that used to laugh loud enough to annoy the neighbors, that used to leave the porch light on for no reason except that it felt warm. That version of him had slowly gotten smaller after the marriage ended, folding in on itself the way paper does when it's been wet and left to dry crooked. He worked at the hardware store on Main Street, the one with the bell above the door that never stopped sounding a little too cheerful for how tired the place looked. He fixed things for a living. Leaky faucets, broken hinges, cracked pipes. And there was something almost funny about that, considering how little he knew how to fix in his own life. Most nights he came home, microwaved something forgettable, and sat by the window watching the rain fall over Lake Millbrook like it had somewhere better to be. He told himself he liked the quiet. He didn't examine that thought too closely. So when the phone rang that night, when a stranger's trembling voice filled his apartment for the first time in longer than he wanted to admit, something in him leaned toward it the way a man leans toward a fire in December, not because he trusts it, but because he's cold enough to risk it. Her name was Elena. She told him that much before she hung up that first night, after almost 40 minutes of talking about nothing and everything, about the rain, about how she hated the sound of clocks ticking in empty rooms, about how she used to call her mother every night before bed and hadn't been able to reach her in 3 days. She's not answering, Elena said. She always answers. Always. Maybe she's just busy, Daniel offered, though it sounded thin even to him. Maybe, Elena said, in a voice that clearly didn't believe it. Before she hung up, she said something that stuck with him long after the line went dead. Thank you for not hanging up on me. Thank you for not actually wanting to talk to your mom, he said, immediately wincing at how that sounded. But Elena laughed. A real one this time, short and surprised, and said, That's the first time anyone's made me laugh in 3 days. Then the line clicked off, and Daniel sat there in his quiet apartment, staring at a phone that had just done something his entire life hadn't managed in 2 years, made him feel like someone, somewhere, had actually seen him for 10 minutes. She called again 2 nights later. Same time, almost to the minute. Like her body had memorized when the loneliest part of the night arrived. I know this is weird, she said. You don't know weird, Daniel said. I once spent 45 minutes color-coding the inside of my toolbox. That's not weird. That's just sad. Thank you. There was an ease growing between them, a kind of rhythm that didn't ask to be there, but settled in anyway, like dust on furniture in a house nobody dares to clean too thoroughly, because it might disturb something. He learned that Elena worked nights at a hospital 2 towns over, that she hated the smell of antiseptic but loved the quiet hum of the building at 3 a.m., that she hadn't slept properly in what felt like months. He didn't ask why. Not yet. There was something in the careful way she avoided certain topics. Her mother, her past, a town she once lived in but never named. That told him pushing would only make her retreat. So instead, he just listened. And somehow, in listening, he started talking too. About Sarah. About the divorce. About how he sometimes drove past their old house just to see if the porch light was still on, even though he knew it wasn't his to turn off or on anymore. That's not weird either, Elena said quietly. That's just sad. Touché. For the first time since the divorce, Daniel found himself looking forward to something. Not big. Not dramatic. Just a phone call at 11:47 p.m. that made the apartment feel a little less like a place he was waiting to leave. 3 weeks passed like that. Calls some nights, silence on others, never quite predictable enough to feel routine, never quite absent enough to feel forgotten. Daniel learned the sound of her sigh when she was tired versus when she was sad. They were different, subtle, but different. He learned she liked rain but hated thunder, that she'd once wanted to be a nurse since she was 8 years old, that she still hadn't reached her mother. Maybe I should drive up there, she said one night. Just to check. Where's up there? A pause. A town called Ashford Hollow. Couple hours from you, actually. Daniel sat up a little straighter. I know Ashford Hollow. Used to fish near there with my dad. Small world, Elena said, though something in her voice sounded less like surprise and more like quiet dread. You okay? I haven't been back there in 11 years, she said. I told myself I never would. Daniel didn't push. But the silence that followed felt different than their usual ones. Heavier, like something old had just shifted in a room that had been still for a long time. It was during the 4th week that the mystery cracked open, almost by accident. Daniel had gone to the hardware store's back office to grab old invoices for a customer complaint, and his manager, an older man named Walt who'd lived in the area his whole life, mentioned a name in passing that made Daniel's chest go cold. Sad story. That family, Walt said, flipping through receipts. The Hartleys. Lost their daughter 11 years back. Car accident on the Ashford Bridge, middle of winter. Never really got over it. The mother especially. Comes in here sometimes for hardware, hands shaking the whole time. What was the daughter's name? Daniel asked, though some part of him already feared the answer. Walt squinted, thinking. Ellie, I think. Maybe Elena. Something like that. The bell above the door jingled cheerfully, mockingly, as Daniel stood frozen behind the counter. That night, when the phone rang at 11:47, Daniel almost didn't answer it. Not because he didn't want to talk to her, but because for the first time, he didn't know who exactly he'd be talking to. Hey, Elena said, her voice as warm and familiar as it had become over the past month. Hey, Daniel said carefully. Can I ask you something? Always. What happened on the Ashford Bridge? The silence that followed was the longest one they'd ever shared. He could hear her breathing change, could hear the particular stillness of someone caught between two truths, the one she'd been hiding and the one she was tired of carrying alone. How do you know about that? She finally asked, her voice quiet, almost frightened. Someone mentioned a family. The Hartleys. Said they lost a daughter on that bridge 11 years ago. Elena let out a breath that sounded like it had been held in for over a decade. I didn't die that night, she said. Everyone thinks I did. My mother thinks I did, for a long time. There was another girl in the car. We'd switched seats minutes before the crash, just for fun, just because we were kids being stupid. She didn't survive. I did. And when I woke up in the hospital, scared and 17 and not thinking straight, I let everyone believe it was me who didn't make it. The girl who died, her name was Ellie too. People got confused. Records got confused. And I was too broken to correct anyone. Daniel sat in stunned silence, the rain outside tapping gently against the glass like it was trying to soften the moment. I ran, Elena continued, voice trembling. I left town the second I could walk without crutches. Changed my last name legally, so no one would trace me back. I told myself it was easier this way, That my mother grieving a dead daughter was kinder than her knowing her daughter was alive and too cowardly to come home and explain herself. Elena, Daniel said softly, that's not cowardice. That's grief wearing a disguise. It's been 11 years, she whispered. How do you even start that conversation? Hi, Mom. I'm not actually dead. Sorry for the 11 years of funerals and grief counseling and birthday candles you blew out alone. You start exactly like you started with me, Daniel said. By picking up the phone. By saying something true, even if your voice shakes the whole time. There was a long pause, filled only with rain and breathing and the particular kind of silence that exists right before someone makes a decision that changes everything. Will you come with me? Elena asked. If I go to Ashford Hollow. I don't think I can do it alone. Daniel looked around his quiet apartment. The dim lamp, the empty chair across from him, the 2 years of silence that had settled into every corner of the place like dust no one bothered to clean. Yeah, he said. I'll come. The drive to Ashford Hollow took 2 hours, most of it spent in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable so much as sacred, like the quiet before something important. Elena sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, watching the gray winter trees blur past the window, occasionally glancing at Daniel like she needed to confirm, again and again, that he was actually there. You don't have to say anything clever, Daniel said at one point. When we get there, you don't have to explain everything perfectly. You just have to show up. That's the hardest part, Elena admitted. Showing up. I know, Daniel said. I spent 2 years not showing up to my own life. Trust me, I know. The Hartley house sat at the end of a quiet street, a modest 2-story home with a porch light that, despite everything, was still on, burning steady against the gray afternoon like it had never once stopped waiting. Elena stood at the end of the driveway for a long moment, frozen, her breath visible in the cold air. What if she hates me? She whispered. What if 11 years of grief turned into 11 years of anger? Then she's angry at someone she loves, Daniel said gently. That's not the same as hate. That's just love that's been hurting for a long time with nowhere to go. Elena nodded slowly, though her eyes were wet. She walked up the driveway, each step heavier than the last, until she finally stood at the front door, a door she hadn't stood in front of in over a decade. She knocked. The sound seemed to echo louder than it should have, louder than any sound had any right to be. Footsteps approached from inside, slow and uncertain, and then the door opened. A woman in her 60s stood there, gray hair pulled back, eyes immediately narrowing in confusion at the sight of a stranger on her porch. Then her gaze moved, slowly, disbelievingly, over Elena's face, searching for something she'd convinced herself she'd never see again. Ellie? The woman whispered, her voice breaking on the single syllable. Elena's composure shattered completely. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I let you believe. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Her mother had already crossed the porch and pulled her into an embrace so tight and so desperate it looked like 11 years of grief collapsing into a single moment of disbelieving relief. Daniel stood quietly by the car, giving them the distance the moment deserved, watching 2 women hold on to each other like the ground beneath them had finally stopped shaking. They stayed in Ashford Hollow for 3 days. Daniel mostly kept to the background, fixing a loose porch step out of habit more than necessity, giving mother and daughter the space to untangle 11 years of silence one conversation at a time. There were tears. There was anger, too, just as he'd warned her there might be. Sharp words about the years lost, about birthdays spent at a grave that held no one, about grief that had no right to exist but existed anyway. But underneath all of it was something steadier, relief. The kind that doesn't erase pain but makes room for it to finally breathe. On the last night, Elena found Daniel sitting on the porch steps, looking out at a sky finally clear of rain for the first time in weeks. You didn't have to come, she said, sitting beside him. I wanted to, Daniel said. Strange thing to admit, but talking to you these past few weeks was the first time in 2 years I felt like I wasn't just waiting around for my life to start again. Elena was quiet for a moment, watching the stars do their slow, patient work above the rooftops. I didn't think a wrong number could fix anything, she said. It didn't fix anything, Daniel said. I think we did that. The phone just gave us an excuse to start. She smiled, small, tired, real. I didn't think I'd ever come back here. I didn't think I'd ever want to talk to anyone again, Daniel admitted. Guess we were both wrong about a few things. Months later, Daniel still kept the porch light on at his own apartment, a small, quiet habit he couldn't quite explain to himself except that it felt like leaving a door open for something good to eventually walk through. Elena visited Millbrook more often now, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just to sit by the lake and listen to the water do what water does, moving forward, slow and certain, the way both of them were finally learning to. They never rushed what was growing between them. There was no dramatic declaration, no music swelling under a kiss in the rain. Just two people who had found each other through a mistake, who had chosen, again and again, to stay on the line instead of hanging up. Daniel still worked at the hardware store. Walt still teased him about smiling more than he used to. And some nights, when the rain came back to tap gently against his window, Daniel would think about that first call. Mom? Is that you? And how the wrong number had somehow dialed exactly the right thing into both of their lives. Elena's mother kept the porch light on too, though now it wasn't out of grief or waiting. It was just a light left on for a daughter who finally, after 11 long years, knew her way home. And somewhere in a quiet apartment by a quiet lake, two people who had once been strangers on a wrong number now sat together in comfortable silence, no longer waiting for the phone to ring, because the loneliest part of their nights had finally found somewhere warm to land.